Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of The Antidote by Oliver Burkeman. How can we be happy if we're constantly trying? Typical self-help advice is turned on its head in Oliver Burkeman's The Antidote, a book that has become a classic in its field. Psychology, ancient Stoicism and Buddhism are used by Burkeman to explain why negative thinking has a beneficial side. Thought-provoking and countercultural, The Antidote is a witty, practical, and wise read. Instead of trying to avoid the things we fear most, like failure, uncertainty, and death, it shows us a negative path to happiness and success. When it comes to happiness, it's not always possible to rely solely on positive thinking. Among other things, we'll take a look at how our anxious attempts to feel secure, avoid failure, and ignore the imminent reality of death, are just a few of the reasons why happiness often fails to find us. Self-help isn't always beneficial. The teachings of positive thinking aren't difficult to grasp. Burkeman sums it up this way: decide to think happy and successful thoughts, banish the specter of sadness and failure, and happiness and success will follow. The message of unwavering optimism, on the other hand, turns out to be less than ideal when it comes to our pursuit of happiness. When we attend a get-motivated seminar or are told out loud that nothing is impossible, we may feel good in the moment. However, how solid is this information? Author claims that at best, this advice is unsupported, and at worst, it causes more pain. Here's why. In the quest for happiness, self-help books are among the things that don't make us happy. People who have purchased a self-help book that didn't immediately solve their problem within the previous 18 months are more likely to buy another one, according to the 18th rule, which self-help publishers use to their advantage. Burkeman understands the recurrence of the self-help pile for those of us who find ourselves there. Our longing for a neat book-sized solution to the being human problem, he says, is understandable. Nevertheless, if we remove the packaging, we may discover that the messages of these works are often trite. Determine what matters most in your life, and then do it, according to books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How to Win Friends and Influence People advises us to be friendly rather than obnoxious and to remember a person's name. In addition to being obvious, much of the advice we're given isn't backed by reliable research. The Yale study of goals is frequently cited in psychology textbooks that discuss the importance of setting goals and making a plan. When Yale University students were asked in 1953 whether or not they had written down specific goals for the rest of their lives, they said yes. Only 3% of those polled said they had. Students from the class of '53 were tracked down by researchers after 2 decades to see how their lives had progressed. The findings were clear and unmistakable. More than 97% of graduates without written goals accumulated more money than those who had a plan in place. An astounding discovery has been made. But there's a problem: this never actually happened. In reality, there was no Yale study of goals at all. A Fast Company reporter went in search of the alleged study's author a few years ago. There were no academic journal citations to be found. As a last resort, Burkeman even called a senior Yale University archivist himself to discuss the matter in more detail. The archivist said, with a frustrated tone in her voice, that no such study existed. When someone asked her this, it wasn't her first time. This means that we should always take what we read in self-help books or hear in seminars with a grain of salt. But, in the interest of full disclosure, let me share with you some recent scientific findings that demonstrate the dangers of attempting to think positively. The consequences of attempting to see the positive in every situation. Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner is a leading expert on the subject of positive thinking. Ironic process theory is where he's most famous. When we try to keep thoughts or behaviors under control, the ironic process theory proposes that doing so can actually make them more prevalent. In the so-called white bear challenge, this has been demonstrated. What happens if you're told to stop thinking about a white bear? Almost certainly, you'll conjure up images of the white bear. Think about where your thoughts will go if someone tells you to focus on what you're grateful for instead of what's negative. Other studies by Wegner support the hypothesis that our constant efforts to be positive have the opposite effect. Research subjects were once informed of a tragic occurrence, but were instructed to suppress their emotions in the wake of it. In the end, they felt worse than those who were only told about the event but were not given any guidance on how to react to it. Researchers gave relaxation tapes to participants in another study who had panic disorders. It was found that their heartbeats were faster than those of patients who listened to audiobooks that did not contain any content that was specifically relaxing. In addition, research shows that people who try to avoid grief are more likely to take longer to recover from a loss than those who don't try at all. As a result, despite our best efforts, mental suppression is not the answer. Reminding ourselves of the good things in our lives doesn't appear to help either. Psychologist Joanne Wood set out to test the efficacy of affirmations in 2009, and here's what she discovered. Writing the phrase "I'm a lovable person" on a daily basis reduced the happiness of people who had low self-esteem. They already didn't think they were particularly lovable, so trying to change their minds only served to reinforce their negative outlook. Positive thinking had the opposite effect, making them feel worse. To put it another way, we often make things worse by attempting to be happy. Ask yourself whether you are happy and you cease to be, wrote philosopher John Stuart Mill. To be happy, one must stop searching for happiness and instead focus on what makes them happy. The question remains, however, are we doomed to an existence of sadness if our attempts to be happy fail miserably? Possibly not, though. To find contentment, take the negative path. He was a journalist for several years in the field of psychology and also took into account his own skepticism about the pursuit of happiness. His realization that our constant pursuit of positivity is counterproductive eventually dawned upon him. In addition, many of us put in an excessive amount of effort to be positive and to eliminate the negative, which is counterproductive. That's exactly what causes us to feel nervous, anxious, uncertain or depressed according to him. As a result, we're challenged to adopt a fundamentally different attitude toward the things that we've worked so hard to avoid our entire lives. What if we could learn to enjoy uncertainty, accept insecurity, and become comfortable with failure? Even begin to appreciate death? What if we didn't spend so much time trying to be so pessimistic? It is possible that in order to be happy, we may need to accept more negative emotions or at the very least, not run away from them. Increasing one's negative capabilities. In the absence of irritability, what if we could learn to accept uncertainty and fear, or mystery and doubt? Our desire for resolution drives a great deal of what we say and do. What if there's no end to the feelings of uncertainty and anxiety? How will things turn out if we decide not to look for a solution? Is there a way to recognize our desire for completeness, certainty, or comfort, but not be compelled to follow it? There is no such thing as true closure, so perhaps it's time to acknowledge this. What if we embrace the concept of openness? Paul Pearsall, a psychologist, coined the term openture to describe the polar opposite of closure. Letting go of the need to correct all of our negative thoughts is a better strategy. Stoics and Buddhists are masters of the art of openture, as demonstrated by their writings. It's not a passive acceptance of life's challenges that defines the Stoic philosophy, rather, it's a tough-minded approach that emphasizes the importance of maintaining a cool head under pressure. This muscle can be strengthened by examining rather than escaping from unpleasant experiences and feelings. The premeditation of evils is one of the most important tools in the Stoics' toolbox. A technique for confronting anxieties is known as negative visualization or premeditation of evils. As a substitute for focusing on the best-case scenario, we imagine the worst-case scenario instead. It's not the event itself that's crippling us, it's our negative beliefs about it. There's an exercise you might be familiar with called the subway station exercise. To help New York patients overcome their apprehensions, psychologist Albert Ellis recommended it. Getting up in the middle of a crowded train and announcing the next stop's name can be a nerve-wracking experience. Certainly, you'd be met with glares, newspaper tosses, and even yelling at you to keep your mouth shut. Going through with it would make you nervous, if not terrified. As a result, those who have tried so-called self-humiliation exercises tend to discover that nothing bad happens. It's not uncommon for us to overestimate the worst-case scenario, and as a result, we end up feeling no shame. It's also manageable to feel self-conscious. How we approach even mildly unpleasant experiences is demonstrated by the subway station exercise, and how we may find unexpected benefits lurking within them. If only we were brave enough to face the truth. When it comes to predicting how bad things will get, we're often off by a long shot. A Buddhist's definition of openness is a readiness to look inward at one's own thoughts and feelings. Our actions don't have to be dictated by our thoughts and feelings. For 1 week, Burkeman practiced silent meditation with a Buddhist monk and discovered that we can train ourselves to observe our thoughts and feelings just as we do the weather. Our internal weather fluctuates just as much as the outside weather. Because of the way the mind works, thoughts and feelings come and go. It's important to remember that trying to control the weather is almost never a good idea in Buddhism. Our negative capacity does not necessitate that we become fervent Stoics or retreat to the Himalayan mountains. But we can learn to embrace some of the things we try so hard to avoid, such as fear, failure and death. Is it possible to have a sense of security while still having fun? It's possible that having a sense of security and actually enjoying one's life are diametrically opposed. Believing in one's own safety does not always result in one's own safety, let alone happiness. The collective mood of happiness in developed countries hasn't been improved much by financial and material security and comfort. According to numerous well-respected research projects, such as the World Values Survey, the world's poorest countries have the highest levels of happiness. According to the World Bank, Nigeria is the most impoverished country in the world. Anxiety and depression are also much less common in poorer countries, according to research. As an aside, their research takes into account the probability of being diagnosed. According to researchers, people who live in these kinds of conditions tend to have fewer illusions about the world and are more resilient. Resilience in the face of adversity appears to be enhanced when people are unable to take counterproductive measures to protect themselves. And this results in a more long-lasting sense of well-being. In light of this, the question arises, is our desire for security a worthwhile goal? Consider your personal relationships. When we put too much pressure on ourselves to feel safe and secure in our relationships, we risk damaging the very things that bring us joy. The degree to which one is open to both positive and negative experiences is a critical component of having healthy relationships. To be authentic and present, we must be willing to be open and vulnerable. In the words of Professor Brené Brown, a world-renowned expert on shame, we can't just say, "Here are the bad things. I don't want these." To avoid negative emotions, we must first protect ourselves from positive ones. We cannot numb emotions selectively. Negative emotions become a barrier to positive ones when we become numb to them. Healthful relationships are the most important determinants of our well-being, but they require a degree of vulnerability, which means giving up the safety net we need to feel secure in our interactions with other people. The majority of the time, there is no such thing as absolute security. To seek security is to remove ourselves from change, the very thing that defines life. Alan Watts writes in Wisdom of Insecurity. As far as we know, we can achieve security like a wave can get out of the ocean. To hold our breath is to lose our breath, as Burkeman puts it. Failure is yet another strong emotion that can make us gasp for air. Fear of failure is characterized by hyperventilation, dizziness, and heart palpitations at the mere thought of it. Acceptance of failure is a friend. Everywhere you look, you'll find someone who's failed. A lot of us would rather not face the reality of it. We get a distorted view of what it takes to be successful when we avoid thinking about failing or avoid using the word impossible. No successful person's autobiography is complete without at least a few passages in which they credit their success to their ability to fail. As a result, it's important to consider whether or not we'd be better off accepting failure. For example, J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, spoke about how she learned to embrace failure in her now famous 2008 Harvard graduation speech. J.K. Rowling believed that she had failed on an epic scale by any conventional measure. Graduation speech. She was a divorced, unemployed single parent living in the UK several years before the speech. She claims that her parents and her own anxieties about her had come true in every way possible. She was well aware that she was the biggest failure in her circle of friends. In her speech, however, she wanted to explain why failing is so enjoyable. Prior to the success of the Harry Potter series, she had to battle through a difficult time in her personal life. What she didn't know was how things would turn out. But she had to get rid of everything that wasn't essential after failing. She stopped trying to be someone she wasn't, and focused all of her energy on the one thing that mattered to her, finishing her novel. The fact that her worst fear had come true and she was still alive gave her a sense of relief. Death is another topic that we avoid the most when discussing being alive. Death should be a celebration. It's possible that we could choose to celebrate death instead of denying it. As we've seen, it's not enough to simply avoid thinking or feeling certain thoughts or feelings. There is no escaping death. Everywhere you look, there's death lurking in the shadows, and it's terrifying. A near-death experience, on the other hand, is something we tend to avoid unless it has recently occurred in the form of a loss or a life-threatening illness or condition. There are many compelling and practical reasons why we should spend more time thinking about death than we currently do. A more contented and genuine life can be had by living each day with an awareness of our own mortality. Despite our best efforts, we are all going to die at some point. But how does being more cognizant of one's own mortality make you happier? How to respond is a practical, down-to-earth, and stoic answer. The more we appreciate and value life, the less time we waste on frivolous pursuits if we are cognizant of its fragility. Everything changes when we contemplate death, which is the ultimate and unavoidable worst-case scenario. Our fears of embarrassment or failure fade away when we face death, leaving us with only what matters. There is a saying by Steve Jobs that goes something like this: remember that you are going to die. Not everyone is terrified of dying. Did you know that Mexico, along with Nigeria, is one of the world's happiest countries? They engage in a ritual known as memento mori, which encourages people to reflect on their own mortality on a regular basis. Inquisitive, Burkeman traveled to Mexico and attended the Day of the Dead celebration. They drink a lot of tequila and eat bread shaped like human remains in honor of death and those who have passed away. At the graves of the dead, they erect shrines and hold vigils. Rather than the loud celebration of death, the Mexican culture seems to have a comfortable companionship with death. Russ Harris, a psychologist, suggests a simple exercise to help us get used to thinking about our own mortality. For those of us who aren't quite there yet, imagine you're 80 years old or older. The sentence "I wish that I'd spent more time on" needs to be completed now. And I regret devoting so much time to. Burkeman cites renowned psychologist Irvin Yalom when discussing death. In Yalom's words, to truly confront our mortality, is to undergo an awakening, a total shift in perspective, that fundamentally transforms how it feels to be alive. Ending on a high note. Positive and negative emotions are both welcome on the road to happiness, according to this book. How about shifting gears and focusing more on awe instead? Because awe encompasses all of our feelings at once, it differs from other common emotions like love, joy, anger, fear, and sadness. To be in awe is to have all of these feelings, but at the same time to have none that can be identified or described. As opposed to the endless pursuit of happiness, the awe-inspired path is a willingness to accept the mysteries of life's mysteries. As a result, there is an acknowledgement that the journey will be riddled with confusion. None of these answers, affirmations, or upbeat optimism can bring this kind of happiness. It also doesn't demand that the project will be a complete success. However, it's a more challenging path, but also a more authentic one. In other words, it's all about moderation, balance, and avoiding the exhausting struggle to be happy. Burkeman did not return to Mexico to live a life infused with death on a regular basis, and he did not humiliate himself on public transportation systems on a regular basis. He hasn't returned to a silent retreat since then. However, in smaller ways, he has incorporated the ability to be negative into his daily routine. Often, he takes a stoic pause in his day. To himself, not the situation, he takes a deep breath and remembers that his anger at the obnoxious coworker, the gridlock, or the burnt food is what really matters. The question "what's the worst that could happen?" provides him with comfort when he's feeling overwhelmed. Furthermore, he holds on to the hope that, no matter how terrifying the situation is, he will be able to cope with it. This book is well worth your time if you're looking for a thorough explanation of the often misunderstood concept of happiness. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.